So, did the revamp of Depth of the Elusive Realm ruin it? Well, let's talk about it. When it comes to game content, ultimately there's going to be as many opinions as there are players. So I will focus my thoughts on how I experienced this revamp in order to talk about the revamp of the Elusive Realm in the form of Solaris 3 Film Festival game feature. We need to talk about how it was before this new one came out. So what was the previous Elusive Realm? I perceived it as a fast-paced combat event. You chose a character, you could also use trial characters. You also chose which echo you were going to use with your character, and you chose an initial buff for the character, together with an initial metaphor that was kind of a general buff. Then you went through several different areas and did combat. And every time you completed a session in the Elusive Realm, you could change the difficulty. So I think the difficulty went all the way up to 6, and each difficulty had more and more areas to go through. Between each area, you had a chance to talk to a white cat, or several if you found them elsewhere behind rocks or something hidden. But these extra cats that you could sometimes find were seemingly random, so sometimes you didn't get an extra cat. And the cats gave you options of 3 metaphors. Once you've gotten your metaphor, you could go and choose between 2 doors. Different doors could either give you new metaphor or get a character upgrade. Other doors led into specific dream state areas that upon completion of the challenge, you could choose to either get more dream fragments or get a companion to join your team. The dream fragments were used when you go into a shop and buy extra buffs in form of the metaphors. For each area you progressed through, the enemy count either increased or the enemy waves increased, or you met tougher enemies. From simple enemies to finally the harder boss enemies. If you succeeded through all the areas without getting defeated, then you would get plenty of rewards. Now from this Elusive Realm, we have a revamped version now called Solaris 3 Film Festival. And for me, which will sound a bit strange coming from me, since I'm pretty bad at combat and I was especially bad at it at the beginning of the game, but I feel the revamp made the Elusive Realm come to a screeching halt. By that I mean that everything became slow. From a fast-paced, combat-oriented event mode, it became a more story-oriented game mode. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, from having been experiencing the Elusive Realm in a 3D generated world and turning it into mostly still images and a 2D board that you traverse to reach different encounters, and then mainly having a story to read through without it being voiced and just a lot of text. And some encounters had also repeated text. I'll get back to that later. And when it comes to the 2D board, it was very slow. The character that you use to traverse the board is walking so slowly that you kind of wish there was a speed up button. Now, what's wrong with that? It's just a different way to engage with the content, right? Well, in that sense, it's true. But what doesn't work for me is that they actually announced it in the stream as a revamp of the Elusive Realm. From that perspective, it's kind of a disappointment. The revamp was a downgrade from being a fast-paced, combat-oriented version to slow-paced, story-based oriented version. There's like the old adage, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. If they had announced it as a completely different and new event, not connected to the previous Elusive Realm, then that would have been a more interesting event mode, and I could approach it from that angle. So I really hope that one day the original Elusive Realm is brought back and not just be satisfied with a weekly version. maybe every other patch or so, bring back the longer version of the Elusive Realm, and then just continue on with the weekly version. Anyway, if we look at the new event, but not from the perspective of a revamp of the Elusive Realm, I think the Solaris 3 Film Festival event is quite interesting. As a person who really likes story-based content, I kind of think that this is quite an interesting concept. The story was kind of interesting, but it wasn't as immersive like side quests, exploration quests, and main story quests, and felt like a downgrade from the rest of the game. I like to have a little more engaging story content, especially if it's not voiced. The 2D game board was kind of fun, but the character that you moved around, the MC, oh my goodness, he walks slow. Especially if I was at one end of the board and wanted to walk to the other end. It took quite a while for him to traverse that distance. Why couldn't they just add like a speed up button, just like in the Cube Derby events? So for example, where you had the Cube event, where you went through a board over and over again, you could speed up the dice roll and the movement of the characters on the board. Like 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times, or something like that. Also, the amount of metaphors you could actually acquire became a lot less than from the original Elusive Realm. But on the positive side, you were able to upgrade your character much more frequently. There's also one place which you can go to that has a symbol of a fireplace. Whenever you go to a fireplace, this text with options always appear. So to speed it up, you have to skip, choose an option, and skip again and choose the next option. Even if you can skip it, it kind of feels boring to do the same thing over and over again, especially since there are several fireplaces you can go to. It would have been better if you got the text and the options the first time you encounter the fireplace. But after that, whenever you go to another fireplace, it would have been nice if you had gotten the extra moderate amount of film rolls. There are places where you encounter dream fragments, and when you step on those, you are given, for example, 50 dream fragments right off the bat. You don't have to go through any story text or anything. That could have been done with the repetitive parts of the fireplace. So, just give us the extra film rolls once we encounter the fireplace more than once. And the story endings is quite frustrating. When I was doing the Mount Firmament story session, it says that there's a second ending. So, I tried to go through the whole thing again. But I didn't get to the second ending. I ended up getting the ending I already had completed. That's kind of frustrating, especially since you have to redo the whole thing. Even if the board starts out without the clouds, you still have to go through the whole story again. And even if you can skip, it's still boring. I like to experience stories, but I don't like to read them over and over again just to reach a second ending. It would have been much better if the board opened up to the second ending once I completed one ending, and just continue from where you left off when you ended the first ending. Or there should be kind of an overview of the different nodes where the story split apart, so you can figure out that, okay, I've done this node and the options doesn't split into a new storyline. So I could move directly to the point where I see there is a split where I actually could go for a second ending. That would have been much less repetitive and less frustration that way. Now, there were a lot of things that I liked as well. They use the Elusive Realms progression system. I also liked how you could progress the characters in this game mode, and that you could acquire characters through a character shop. I also liked how they added a synergy feature, so I needed to choose what team I wanted to put together that actually synergized with each other in order to get a synergy burst. So yeah, all in all, I think it's quite an interesting game mode that probably will get better over time, but as a revamp of the previous Elusive Realm, that was a total disaster and quite a disappointment. And I guess that's mostly because they announced it as a revamp and they hyped it up, and for me, it did not really deliver. Anyways, these were my thoughts, and that's it for this time. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.